Have you ever wondered why a man can crave you in silence, but bury that hunger beneath an indifferent gaze? It is not indifference. It is torment. He thinks of her, the echo of her voice, the way her eyes once held galaxies of trust and challenge, the scent of her resilience wrapped in grace. But the modern man, fractured by pride and patterns, would rather lose sleep than reveal his longing. His silence is not emptiness. It is a battlefield where his anima, the feminine soul he seeks and fears, wages war against the fortress of his unresolved shadows. In the hour when the world falls quiet, he rewinds the smallest gestures, the tilt of her head when she asked a question only a woman of depth would dare to ask. He replays her absence as though it were a film with no end. He does not text, he does not call, but make no mistake, you are not forgotten. This is the paradox of the masculine wound. He wants her light but cannot stand in it. He is drawn to her authenticity, yet recoils from the mirror it holds up to his own fragmentation, and so he watches from afar, obsessively, silently, at night. The feminine must understand this. A man's silence is never neutral. It either conceals indifference or it masks obsession. But obsession without initiation is cowardice wrapped in romantic fantasy. You are not here to be the muse of an incomplete man's dreamscape. And yet, the ache he feels, it is real. He cannot name it, but it possesses him. She awakened something ancient in him, not with her body, but with her presence. She did not need to seduce, her essence undid him. A woman who has walked through her own darkness and emerged radiant is dangerous to a man still hiding in his shadows. He knows it. That's why he retreats. He's seen glimpses of the wild feminine in her, and she is not the girl who waits by the phone or clings to hope like a child begging to be chosen. No, she is the woman who knows, the one whose silence devours more than 1,000 words. The one whose absence makes the air in his lungs feel insufficient. But he won't tell her. He'll scroll through old messages, visit her social media profile under the cover of digital night, study every word she ever said to him, as if decoding a sacred text. Not because he's rational, but because her energy slipped under his skin. She has become a symbol, and symbols are never forgotten. They haunt. Jung taught that when the anima is projected onto a woman, she becomes more than herself in his eyes. She is mystery, redemption, chaos, and grace, all at once, and that is precisely what terrifies him. Because if he surrenders to her image, he will have to confront what lies beneath, his own spiritual hunger, his disconnection, his loneliness dressed in ego. She is not responsible for his awakening, but she was the spark, and now he cannot sleep. He sees her in dreams he can't interpret, feels her in songs he can't stop playing. He tries to distract himself with substitutes, other women, achievements, noise, but nothing scratches the itch of soul recognition. Still, he says nothing. Why? Because to speak would require vulnerability. To name his longing would mean confronting the walls he's built. And most men would rather suffer in silence than risk collapse. But you, woman of instinct and vision, you already know this. You feel it when your chest tightens out of nowhere, when his energy lingers in your space without warning, when his name crosses your mind like a whisper from the unseen. You sense that he watches, that he remembers, that he wants, and yet you must not chase. To chase a man who resists his soul is to betray your own. You are not the rescuer of wounded kings who refuse their thrones. You are not here to mother the emotionally starved or to coax love out of a man locked in ego. No, you are the flame. He must choose to walk through fire, to stand beside you. And if he doesn't, let him burn in silence, because here is the truth. When a man feels the pull of a true feminine force, not a performance, not manipulation, but essence, it doesn't vanish. It anchors in him like a seed buried in frost, waiting for him to become spring. Until then, he watches, and waits, and aches. But the woman who knows who she is, she moves forward, not away, not bitter, not resentful, but sovereign. She doesn't need his confession to validate what she already sensed. She was the mirror. He simply couldn't face his reflection. He remembers the way she looked at him, not with flirtation, but with clarity, the gaze of a woman who sees through veils. That is what unsettled him, not her beauty, though she carries it like a quiet rebellion, but her knowing. She did not need him. She chose to meet him, and that, to a man unprepared for his own depths, is unbearable. He fears her gaze because it holds him accountable to the man he could become. When the feminine awakens the archetype of the lover within the masculine, it is not merely about romance, it is initiation. Her presence disrupts the rhythm of his complacency. Suddenly his distractions lose their flavor. His carefully built image, the stoic mask, the invulnerable posture, begins to crack under the weight of an unseen need, not for her body, but for his soul. And still, he tells no one. Because to admit that a woman shifted his inner world would be to admit that he is not in control of it. And control is the false god most men worship, until it abandons them in the middle of the night. So he stays silent, watches from behind digital corners, wonders if she feels it too. Does she? The woman he thinks about, the one who lives in the tension between softness and sovereignty, she feels more than she speaks. She picks up on the subtle currents, the sudden waves of energy, the shift in the air, but she's learned to observe without attachment, to let his silence speak volumes. She has walked through the fire of emotional abandonment before and emerged intact. She is no longer tempted by half-hearted love wrapped in poetic silence. And yet, part of her wonders, why doesn't he say it? It's not pride, not exactly, it's fear, not of her rejection, but of his own unraveling. To admit he feels something deep for her is to admit that he no longer feels at home in the surface-level world, that the mask he wears among friends and strangers alike is starting to suffocate him. She stirs the death of the persona, the awakening of the self. That is no small thing. That is a storm. And she is the eye of it. She doesn't chase him because she knows that if he is meant to rise, he will. If he is meant to step into the full gravity of his masculine, he must choose it, not for her, but for himself. Until then, she watches, not out of longing, but out of sacred detachment, the kind born from deep inner work, from nights of solitude and mirrors and prayers whispered through tears. She has loved before, but this is different. Because this man does not just stir her desire, he stirs her becoming. He activates old wounds and untapped gifts alike. And that is the most dangerous kind of connection, the one that asks you to confront every part of yourself, to die and be reborn in the fire of emotional honesty. But she won't move toward him. She knows that the feminine is not meant to initiate. She is meant to invite, with her silence, with her stillness, with her unwavering embodiment. And so, while he paces his mind at night, rereading fragments of their moments like scripture, she sleeps deeply, not out of indifference, but out of peace. She has given what was hers to give. The rest is not hers to carry. She trusts the sacred timing of the soul. If he is to rise, he will find his voice, not the voice that flatters, but the one that trembles with truth. Until then, his sleepless nights are the fire of his own making, and maybe that's what he needs. Because only when a man is undone can he be remade. Only when he is haunted by the echo of the woman who saw his soul will he understand the cost of silence. And if he does not, then let him become a ghost in her memory, a lesson, not a loss. There is something sacred in a woman's restraint. When she does not run after the breadcrumb trail of half-expressed affection, when she resists the ache to decode a man's silence, when she chooses her dignity over his confusion, that is when she becomes untouchable, not because she is cold, but because she is whole. A man feels this, even in silence, especially in silence, because it is not her absence that wounds him. It is her presence without pursuit. She lives, she breathes, she blooms, all without his permission. And suddenly, his fantasy crumbles. She's no longer the idea he controls in his mind. She is real, and real women cannot be kept in cages of maybe. He thinks about her when no one else is around, when the noise dies down, when he cannot numb himself with work or pleasure. That's when she returns, not as a memory but as a mirror. She reflects everything he buried, his vulnerability, his longing, his truth. He remembers how she spoke, not to impress, but to reveal, the way she listened without needing to fix him, the way she saw him, not as a project, but as a man in the making. And that seeing, it was intoxicating, terrifying, addictive, because it pierced through his defenses and touched something ancient, his desire to be chosen by the feminine, not for what he had, but for who he was becoming. And yet, he did not stay. He distanced himself, like so many men who have not yet met their pain. He chose silence. But silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of fear, fear of not being enough, fear of surrendering to something greater than the ego. Fear of being seen, truly seen, by a woman who doesn't play games, but plays for keeps. You, woman of depth and storm, have become the stillness he cannot forget. Not because you begged or pleaded or clung, but because you left space, sacred space, and the masculine longs to fill what the feminine opens, but only if he has the courage to rise into it. That is the first sign. He begins to orbit, not physically, not in ways the world can always see, but in energy. He appears in moments that feel too charged to be coincidence. His name comes up when you speak to strangers. Songs you once heard together begin to follow you like shadows. You feel a tug in your chest that is not yours alone. He has entered the realm of psychic pursuit. You are no longer just a woman to him. You are the archetype, the anima, the soul's compass. And yet he still resists the call to action, because the ego does not surrender easily. It must be brought to its knees. That is the second sign. He grows restless, not just with you, but with everything. His job loses meaning. His relationships feel hollow. The things that once gave him power now leave him numb. This is the cracking of the false self, the breaking open required for transformation. He may not know it yet, but you have triggered his initiation. You were not his distraction. You were his doorway, but only he can walk through it. You cannot pull him across the threshold. You cannot inspire him into bravery. A man must decide for himself that his soul is worth more than his pride. And so, the third sign emerges. He seeks you out without seeking you. He watches, listens, waits, hoping the universe will deliver a sign through your posts, your voice, your presence. He becomes the student of your silence. He hopes you will reach out, break the tension, offer him an exit from his internal war. But when you don't, when you stay grounded, sovereign, aligned, you become the fire and the proof, the final sign. He returns, not as a man with lines, but as a man with scars. He may not say all the right things. He may stumble, falter, weep, but his voice will shake with the truth he tried to bury. He will confess, not his obsession, but his transformation. He will not return to be rescued. He will return because he chose to become. And if he never does, you will still rise. Because the woman who learns to be the center of her own story no longer waits to be written into someone else's. There comes a moment in every awakened woman's journey where she must choose between being wanted and being met. To be wanted is easy. It flatters the surface. It feeds the wound. It keeps her tethered to a love story written in someone else's handwriting. But to be met, soul to soul, truth to truth, requires patience, strength, and the willingness to walk alone through the silence of a man who thinks of her, but says nothing. This silence is not empty. It is charged with all the things he couldn't say, all the feelings he buried beneath masculine pride and fear, and the deeper his obsession grows, the more his silence speaks, not in words, but in delay, distance, hesitation. She knows. She feels it like a hum beneath her skin, a knowing in her womb, a pressure in her chest when the air suddenly shifts. He is close but not near, present but not showing up. And in that space the most sacred transformation begins, hers. Because when a woman stops seeking confirmation from a man and starts seeking union with herself, she becomes untouchable. Not hard, not guarded, but whole. And wholeness is magnetic in a way manipulation can never be. He senses this. It's why she haunts him. Not because she begged to be remembered, but because she moved on without losing her softness. She did not collapse into bitterness. She did not close her heart. She simply chose her own sacred timing over his delayed clarity. That is her power. The feminine is never passive. She is receptive, and in that receptivity she calls forth either greatness or retreat. A man either rises to meet the goddess in her or watches from the sidelines as she becomes more radiant without him. And still, he thinks of her. Every man who has once been seen by a conscious woman carries her memory like a flame. It flickers in moments of silence, in failures, in nights spent with someone who can't touch him where she did, beneath the armor, in the soul, but he doesn't speak. Why? Because to speak would be to surrender, to admit he never found her in anyone else, that her laughter still echoes, that her leaving broke something he didn't know was fragile, and that he wishes, secretly, fiercely, that she would look at him again, not because he deserves it, but because he finally knows. But the awakened feminine does not wait for late confessions. She recognizes the sacred function of heartbreak, to turn longing inward, to alchemize pain into power, to stop begging to be chosen and start remembering that she is the one who chooses. She chooses silence when drama calls. She chooses detachment when chaos tempts. She chooses boundaries when crumbs are offered. And this choice is not made without grief. No, the death of a fantasy is a funeral only the soul attends. But once it's buried, she breathes, fully, deeply, as herself. And then she becomes a force, a woman who no longer needs to be understood to feel at peace, a woman who no longer needs closure because she carries completion in her bones, a woman who knows that the man who truly sees her will never make her wonder. He will show up. Without games, without confusion, without delay. Until then she walks in beauty and in truth, and he watches, listens, thinks, regrets, but she builds. She builds the life she used to hope someone would offer her. She becomes the anchor in her own storm. She becomes the mother to her inner child. She becomes the muse and the artist. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable. That is why he thinks of her. That is why he dreams of her when the world goes quiet. Because he has never met a woman who knew her worth enough to walk away, not in anger but in grace, not in punishment but in power. And though he does not say it, his silence holds it. She was the one. She was the one. Not because she was perfect, not because she made him feel special, or stroked his ego, or folded herself to fit into his fractured vision of love. She was the one because she stood in her fullness, even when it cost her his presence. And he will think of her for the rest of his life, not as a mistake, not as a missed opportunity, but as the woman who awakened something in him that he was not ready to claim. Because what she offered was not convenience, it was consecration. She didn't want a part of him. She wanted all of him, heart, mind, soul, shadow, and men who are not ready to face their shadows run from that kind of light. She wasn't asking for a label, she was asking for presence, not a plan, presence. And that, to the fragmented masculine, is terrifying, because presence requires responsibility, not the kind that signs contracts and makes promises, but the kind that sits with discomfort, that holds a woman's gaze even when shame rises, that stays when the ego screams to flee. He was not ready, so he left, or he distanced, or he said he needed time, or worse, he said nothing at all. And now he can't stop thinking of her. Because in a world full of women trained to perform, to chase, to prove, she did none of that. She simply stood, radiant, quiet, rooted, not demanding love, but embodying it. She didn't throw tantrums when he ghosted. She didn't send paragraphs begging for clarity. She didn't punish, she didn't persuade, she released, and that broke him in a way her begging never could. Because a woman who begs can be pitied or dismissed, but a woman who blesses and walks away, she becomes mythic. She becomes the story he tells himself in the dark, the one that got away, the one who saw his soul but refused to stay where she wasn't honored, the one who held a mirror up to his wounds and said, heal or stay hollow. And even if he finds another, even if he marries, even if he builds a life with someone else, there will be nights where her name comes back to him, uninvited, like a prayer he never finished. Not because he still wants her, but because part of him still wants to be the man who could have kept her. That is the quiet price of cowardice. And she no longer needs to know, because she has shed the skin of the seeker. She no longer asks if he misses her. She no longer aches for signs. She no longer scans the silence for his meaning. She has become meaning itself. Her path is not dictated by who thinks of her, but by what she knows to be true, that she is not here to haunt hearts. She is here to heal her own, that she is not the echo of a man's longing. She is the voice of the divine feminine, rising, rooted and sovereign. And should he ever return, voice trembling, eyes soft, hands open, not in fantasy but in readiness, she may choose to see him again, but not as the man he was, only as the man who became, not for her, but because of her. Until then, she is not waiting. She is becoming. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.